The 1,000 injuries of Fortunato I had borne as best I could, but when he ventured upon insult, I vowed revenge. Hello, writers. Here I am at the grave of Edgar Allan Poe to talk to you today about plot at the grave of Edgar Allan Poe. Did you see what I did there? And here's the thing about plot. We tend to think that plot is what happens in a story. But even Poe knew that there was another part to it. It's not just what happens in a story, it's why what happens. So at the beginning of the story that you're going to read, the Cask of Amontillado, the very first sentence tells us why the character wants what he wants. He has been insulted, and he wants revenge. Plot without a why, without motive, is just a meaningless series of events. You know Poe's grave is in Baltimore, don't you? But the thing is, it's not just any old why that makes a plot go. You don't want a story, why did someone leave their home? Because a meteor was coming and going to crash on it. You can come up with any old why. But the why you want to come up with, the why you want to think about, is connected completely to the character. It's the character's why, the character's motivation, that leads to what happens in the story. The character makes things happen in the story. This is sometimes difficult to remember. And the reason is, in our lives, we often feel buffeted by the events around us. Suddenly there's a pandemic, and our lives change, and we had nothing to do with that. But in fiction, the character's motivations always lead the character to take actions, and those actions are what drive the story forward. Moreover, the character's actions reveal something about the character. So plot is actually pretty complex. You want to have the story move forward based on the character's actions. You want those actions to be dramatic, and you want those actions to say something about who the character is. The writer, Kurt Vonnegut, put it this way: plot is easy. A character wants something, the character can't have it. What happens next? And that really works into what we talked about when we talked about character. As you're doing vertical writing, you're thinking about what is your character's obsession? What is your character's desire? What is your character's preoccupation? And remember, we said that you, yourself, young writer, are writing out of your own obsessions, your own preoccupations. You're giving them to a character, the character who's bringing the human music into your story. Your wants begin to coincide with the character's wants, but the character can't have it. What happens next? So, some tips. When you're writing your own story, you want to start as close to the end of the story as possible. It's hard to know where that is, what's possible, until you've written the story the first time. Hemingway, in one of his stories, wrote a 10-page story and then went back and cut off the first 5-page story, first 5 pages. That first 5 pages was him just learning what the story was about. In other words, don't think that everything you write is precious and needs to stay. Sometimes what you write at the beginning can go away. Another tip is to hook the reader from the get-go. Just grab them as soon as you can. Grab them with a great opening line. Grab them with an arresting image. Grab them with interesting character. Put music in your sentence, by which I mean rhythm, sound. Make it interesting. Put human music by giving us a dramatic moment for a character. Grab the reader right away. Start, Chekhov told us, start in the middle of things, right? Don't start with your character waking up to an alarm in the middle of the morning. Overdone, cliche, not even that interesting. Chekhov has a play, Uncle Vanya, that starts with 2 people sitting at a table, and the old woman says to the younger man, "More vodka?" You've started in the middle of things, right? You've learned that already they've been sitting there for a while drinking vodka because she said, "More vodka." Right away, there's a little bit of tension. So hook the reader. Grab them right away.
Tip number 3. Don't let the reader go. You've hooked them. You've grabbed the reader. The reader is into your story. Don't suddenly try to tell them that, say, people in Baltimore don't eat crabs. Right? Don't misspell words. Don't give them any reason to remember that they are reading. The writer John Gardner said a short story should be a vivid and continuous dream, a chance to forget the fact that you're reading. That's your goal. Don't give your reader any reason to leave. Certainly don't bore the reader.
Number 4, raise the emotional stakes. Make what's happening in the story more and more important to your character. So, for example, in Young Lions, Caesar's need to succeed at this robbery keeps getting greater and greater. His disappointment in Sherman and his own father and his own life keeps getting greater and greater and greater. Raise the stakes. Make things matter more and more. The family crashes. Fine, they crashed. But now here comes the misfit, right? That's how you raise the stakes. 5, but keep things simple. It's really easy to let your imagination go crazy and take your character along paths that seem ridiculous, right? Oh, it turns out my character is a vampire. Oh, it turns out my character is a serial killer. Oh, it turns out my character has a kind of mental illness that means all along the character has been speaking to a ghost. No. One of the tricky and interesting things about fiction is that you're supposed to surprise the reader in a way that seems completely plausible, completely expected. So that when the reader is surprised, the reader can say, "Oh, yes. That makes perfect sense. I should have seen that coming." Number 6, complicate
things and then create reversals and turns. Okay, Caesar's plan is working. Carol is bringing the money back to him. But wait, she's crying. And when Caesar wants her to share the money with him, she says, "Can you just wait?" Carol's reaction has complicated the scene and reversed how Caesar thought it would go. And you know what? That further complicates the scene because now Caesar gets angry and he hits her. And he didn't expect that to happen. And she didn't expect that to happen. Though probably she understood it was possible. Number 7. Flashbacks kill momentum. Memories don't. If you find yourself wanting to put a flashback in your story, ask yourself, could my character have this as a memory instead? Because remember what we talked about character. People have memories when they're having an emotional experience that triggers the memory. Well, then you don't leave the full onrush of the narrative to go and talk about the past. The past as a memory becomes part of the present. But if you go into a flashback, then you're hurting your momentum because you actually are going into the past and you're leaving the present for a while. And if you hook the reader to go into the flashback, can give the reader a reason to leave the story. Flashbacks kill momentum, memories don't. Number 8, write toward the end of your story without knowing what's going to happen. Vertical writing, character. And if you get there and are surprised by what happened, and you think it's just right, chances are the reader will also be surprised and think it's just right. Number 9, always consider cutting the last sentence or the last paragraph. Most of us have a tendency to want to wrap things up in a neat little bow, and the story actually ends a sentence or 2 or 3 before we tie that little bow. It can make your story much more dramatic. Finally, number 10. A scene can have the same plot arc that a story can. What's a plot arc? Did I just complicate things there? Did I just add a turn or a reversal to this lecture? So yeah, a long time ago, there was this guy named Gustav Freytag, and he was a playwright from Germany, and he made a big study of Greek tragedy and figured out that there was a kind of formula that most plays followed, especially tragic plays. And this isn't the law. It's not how every story is, but it's a good way to begin thinking about how stories are structured. And it gives us some words, some vocabulary to use when talking about stories. So he pretty much figured out that a story followed a kind of arc or pyramid shape or slope. And he gave that slope 5 points that describe what's happening in a story. And I'll just go through them quickly, one by one. They're on your PowerPoint. There's exposition and or the inciting event. It's what starts a story, right? The family decides they're going to go on vacation. The brownie troop arrives at camp and decides it's day 2 and they decide they're going to kick somebody's butt. Whatever gets the story going is what comes first. Makes sense, right? Then there's rising action. And this is when you get into those complications and turns and reversals that we talked about. The stakes rise. The character becomes more emotionally invested in the problem or the trouble or the desire. But it's regularly frustrated, right? Can't quite get what the character wants to get. All of which leads up to The climax, we all know that, the most important, exciting, emotional part of the story. Maybe it's really physical too, but it doesn't have to be. It just has to be the part where the intensity is the greatest. And somehow we know that the story is going to change from there on out. In fact, probably the character's life will never be the same after the climax. And then there's the falling action, which comes after that, as the strands of the story are brought together, and finally the denouement, where the story settles and ends. That's it for Plot. I look forward to class on Thursday and seeing what happens next.
And when you come to visit Poe's grave, be sure to bring pennies and flowers.